The bank letter landed on the kitchen table like a slap. Evelyn Hart stared at the red stamp across the top of the page. Final notice. Her hands trembled as she read the number at the bottom, a number so large it made her stomach twist. She had 3 weeks to pay it, or she would lose the only thing left of her family, the small house on Maple Lane where her mother had raised her and where her mother had died 2 years ago. She pressed her palms against her eyes and tried to breathe. The event planning business she had built from nothing had collapsed after her biggest client pulled out without warning, leaving her with unpaid bills, an empty office, and a stack of debts that grew heavier every month. She had tried everything. She had sold her car, canceled her insurance, and taken every small job she could find, but none of it was enough. Her phone rang. She almost ignored it, but the screen showed an unknown number with a strange country code. She answered anyway, because at this point, nothing could make her situation worse. "Miss Hart," a smooth voice said, "my name is Mr. Whitfield. I am calling on behalf of His Grace, the Duke of Camden." Evelyn blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" "The Duke of Camden, Alexander Ashford. He would like to meet with you today if possible. It concerns a matter of great importance and great reward." She almost laughed. A duke wanting to meet her, a woman about to lose her house, sounded like a bad joke. But something in the man's voice was serious, urgent even. She agreed to meet him that afternoon at a quiet cafe near the river, mostly out of curiosity and partly because she had nothing left to lose. The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and fresh bread. Evelyn arrived early, wearing her best coat, the only one without a tear in the sleeve. She sat by the window and watched the door, wondering if this was some kind of mistake. At exactly 3 o'clock, a tall man walked in. He wore a dark gray coat, simple but clearly expensive, and he moved with the kind of quiet confidence that made people glance up without meaning to. His eyes found her immediately, as if he already knew what she looked like. "Miss Hart," he said, taking the seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you for coming." "You didn't give me much choice," she said. "Your assistant said this was urgent." "It is." He folded his hands on the table. "I will be direct because I do not have time to waste, and I suspect neither do you. I need a fiancé, not a real one, a performance. 6 months, perhaps less. In exchange, I will pay off every debt you have, including whatever is threatening your home." Evelyn stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want a what?" "My grandmother, the Duchess, is dying," Alexander said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying something rower underneath. "Her final wish is to see me settled before she passes. If I do not present her with a fiancé within the month, the family estate and title will pass to my cousin Edmund, a man who cares nothing for the tenants, the staff, or the history of our family. He would sell every piece of it within a year." "So you want to lie to your dying grandmother?" "I want to give her peace in her final days," he corrected. "And I want to protect people who depend on that estate for their livelihoods, farmers, staff who have worked there for generations. My cousin would destroy all of it." Evelyn looked out the window, watching the river move slowly past. Part of her wanted to walk away immediately. Lying to a dying woman felt wrong, no matter the reason. But another part of her, the part that had spent sleepless nights doing math that never worked out, could not ignore what he was offering. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You have no family connections to the aristocracy, which means no one will suspect this was arranged. You are, according to everyone I have spoken with, honest, hardworking, and currently in a position where you need help. I am offering a fair exchange, Miss Hart, nothing more. And if I say no, then I will find someone else, and you will still be facing that bank letter on Thursday." His bluntness startled her, but she respected it more than she expected to. There was no false kindness in his offer, no pretending this was anything other than a transaction. She thought of her mother's house, the garden her mother had planted, the kitchen where she had learned to cook, all of it slipping away because of numbers she could not fix fast enough. I need rules, she said quietly, if I agree to this. I expected as much. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. I have already drafted them. No physical affection beyond what is necessary in public. No expectation of real feelings. A clean, quiet end to the engagement once my grandmother's situation has resolved, with a mutual and dignified statement to the press. You will move into Ashford Manor for the duration, purely for appearances, and my staff will help you prepare for public appearances. Evelyn took the document and read through it carefully. Every line was precise, cold, businesslike. It should have made her feel safer. Instead, it made her feel like she was signing away a piece of herself, even though nothing about her heart was involved. And the money, she asked. Transferred the moment you sign. Your debt's cleared within 48 hours. She looked up at him, searching his face for some sign of deception, some hint that this was a trick. She found nothing but tired determination, the look of a man who had run out of easier options. I'll need a lawyer to look at this first, she said. Of course, take the evening. Mr. Whitfield will answer any questions your lawyer might have. He stood, buttoning his coat. I know this is unusual, Miss Hart. I do not enjoy asking it of you, but I am out of time and so, I suspect, are you. He left without another word, and Evelyn sat alone at the table for a long time, the document heavy in her hands. That night, she barely slept. She called an old friend from university who now worked as a lawyer, a sharp woman named Grace who read through every line twice before finally sighing. It's airtight, Grace said. Almost too airtight. He's protecting himself completely, but it also protects you. If this is real, if he actually pays what he says he will, this could save your house, Evelyn. And if it isn't real, then you walk away with nothing, same as now. But something tells me he's not lying. Men like this don't usually beg. He needs you more than he's letting on. By morning, Evelyn had made her decision. She dressed carefully, the same coat from the day before, and met Mr. Whitfield at the offices of Ashford and Associates, a tall gray building near the center of the city. Alexander was waiting in a private room, the contract already laid out on the table. You've decided, he said, watching her closely. I have conditions of my own, she said, sliding a page across the table. I keep my own name in public. I will not lie about my past or pretend to be someone I am not. And if at any point this arrangement puts my safety or dignity at risk, I walk away, no penalty, no argument. Alexander read her addition slowly, then nodded once. Agreed. They signed the papers within the hour. Evelyn's hand shook as she wrote her name beneath his, the ink feeling far heavier than it should have. When it was done, Alexander extended his hand, and she shook it, a strange formal gesture between two people about to pretend they were in love. There is one more thing you should know, he said as they stood. My grandmother is sharp, sharper than most people twice her age. She will ask questions you may not expect. I need you to be convincing, Miss Hart. Her heart cannot take disappointment right now. Evelyn thought of her own mother of the last months when everything had felt fragile and precious at once. I understand, she said softly. I won't disappoint her. That afternoon, a car arrived at her small house on Maple Lane to collect her belongings. As she packed the last of her things, Evelyn looked around the empty rooms one final time, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or the only choice that could save it. The bank letter still sat on the kitchen table, but for the first time in months, it no longer felt like the end of everything. It felt, strangely, like the beginning of something she could not yet name. As the car pulled away from Maple Lane, Evelyn caught one last glimpse of the house through the rear window, the garden her mother had loved still blooming despite everything. She did not know yet that within a month, the lines she had drawn so carefully, no feelings, no real affection, would begin to blur in ways she never expected. She only knew that for the first time in a long while, she had a reason to hope. The road to Ashford Manor stretched long and quiet ahead of her, lined with old oak trees that seemed to lean in as if watching her arrive. Evelyn pressed her hand against the cool window and took a slow breath. Whatever waited for her at the end of that road, there was no turning back now. The gates of Ashford Manor rose before her like something out of an old painting, tall iron bars twisted into patterns of leaves and vines, framed by stone pillars worn smooth by centuries of weather. Evelyn stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, staring up at the house itself, a massive structure of gray stone with windows that seemed to watch her arrival. She had grown up in a small house with creaking floors and a leaking roof. This place looked like it belonged in a history book. A woman in a neat uniform greeted her at the door. "Miss Hart, welcome. I am Grace, His Grace's assistant for the household. He asked me to show you to your room and explain how things work here before you meet the Duchess tomorrow." Evelyn followed her through a long hallway lined with paintings of stern-faced men and women, their eyes seeming to track her every step. "Are those all family?" she asked. "Every one of them. Dukes and duchesses of Camden going back 300 years. You will be expected to know some of their names, at least the important ones, before you meet the Duchess." "That sounds like a lot to remember." "It is, but His Grace has arranged lessons for you starting tomorrow morning. Etiquette, family history, the correct way to address certain guests. Do not worry, Miss Hart. Everyone who marries into this family struggles at first." Evelyn's room was larger than her entire house had been, with tall windows overlooking a garden full of roses and a fireplace already lit against the evening chill. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed and allowed herself, finally, to feel the full weight of what she had agreed to. This was not just signing a paper. This was stepping into an entirely different life, even if only for a short while. Dinner that evening was quiet and formal, just her and Alexander at a table long enough to seat 20 people. He sat at the far end, and for a while neither of them spoke, the only sound the soft clink of silverware against porcelain. "You don't have to sit so far away," Evelyn finally said, "unless that's a rule too." A faint smile crossed his face, the first she had seen from him. "Old habit. My father always sat at the head of the table. I suppose I've never questioned it." He gestured to the seat closer to him. "Please, if it makes this easier." She moved down the table and the distance between them felt smaller, though still far from comfortable. "Tell me about your grandmother," she said. "If I'm going to convince her tomorrow, I should know more than just her name." Alexander set down his fork, considering the question carefully. "Her name is Margaret. She raised me after my parents passed when I was young. My father died in an accident, and my mother followed not long after from grief more than illness, I think. Margaret never remarried, never left this house. She gave up everything to raise a boy who barely spoke to her for years, angry at a world that had taken so much from him." "That sounds lonely," Evelyn said softly, "for both of you." "It was. She never gave up on me, though. Even when I pushed her away, even when I buried myself in work and avoided this house for months at a time, she kept the door open. She deserves to see me happy before she goes, even if what she sees isn't entirely real." Evelyn studied him across the table, seeing past the cold businessman from the cafe for the first time. There was grief there, buried deep, and a loyalty to his grandmother that ran far deeper than obligation. "Why haven't you married for real, then? Surely there have been women interested." "Plenty," he admitted, a dry edge returning to his voice. "But most were interested in the title, not the man attached to it. I stopped trusting the difference a long time ago." The words landed heavier than he probably intended, and Evelyn felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. She thought of her own life, of people who had drifted away once her business failed, once she had nothing left to offer them. She understood, more than she expected to, what it meant to wonder if anyone valued you for yourself alone. The next morning, Evelyn woke early, nerves twisting in her stomach as Grace helped her dress for the meeting with the Duchess. The gown was simple but elegant, pale blue, nothing like anything Evelyn had ever owned. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. "You look wonderful," Grace said kindly. "Just be yourself mostly. The Duchess can smell false charm from a mile away." Margaret Ashford was seated in a bright sitting room when Evelyn entered, a small woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Despite her frail frame, there was a sharpness to her gaze that made Evelyn straighten instinctively. "So," Margaret said, studying her from head to toe, "you're the young woman who has captured my grandson's attention." "Yes, ma'am, I'm Evelyn Hart." "Sit, child. I don't bite, whatever Alexander may have told you." Margaret gestured to the chair across from her, and Evelyn obeyed, folding her hands nervously in her lap. For the next hour, Margaret asked question after question about Evelyn's family, her work, her opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Evelyn answered honestly, remembering Alexander's warning that Margaret could sense a lie instantly. She spoke of her mother, of the small house on Maple Lane, of the business she had built and lost. And to her surprise, Margaret listened with genuine interest rather than judgment. "You've had a hard life," Margaret said finally, her voice softer than before. "Harder than most of the women Alexander has brought home over the years. Good. He needs someone who understands what it means to struggle, not someone who's never known a difficult day." "Your Grace, Margaret, please, we're going to be family soon if my grandson has any sense." She reached out and took Evelyn's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "He looks at you differently than I expected. I've watched that boy shut people out for years. Whatever you've done, keep doing it." Evelyn felt a flush of guilt rise in her chest, knowing the truth behind the arrangement, knowing that whatever Margaret saw in Alexander's eyes was not what she believed it to be. But the old woman's happiness felt too fragile to shatter, so Evelyn simply smiled and said nothing more. That evening, Alexander found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath a large willow tree. "She likes you," he said, sitting down beside her, keeping a careful distance. "More than I expected, honestly. My grandmother does not warm to people easily." "She's not what I imagined," Evelyn admitted. "I thought she'd be cold, distant. She's kind. Painfully kind, actually. It makes lying to her feel worse, not easier." "I know." Alexander stared out at the darkening sky. "There were times I nearly called this whole thing off out of guilt, but watching her today, happier than she's been in months, I think this might be the right choice after all, even if the reasons behind it aren't." They sat in silence for a while, the evening air cool and fragrant with roses. Evelyn glanced at him, studying the sharp line of his jaw, the tired shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of years spent carrying more responsibility than any one person should. "Can I ask you something? Why did you never question the title, the traditions, any of it? You clearly resent parts of this life." "Because someone has to carry it," he said simply. "The tenants who work this land, the staff who have served this family for generations, they depend on someone taking responsibility. I never asked for this life, but I refuse to be the reason it falls apart." Evelyn found herself admiring that resolve, even as she recognized the loneliness woven through it. A week later, their first public appearance arrived, a charity gala hosted by one of Alexander's business associates. Evelyn stood nervously in the entryway of the manor, wearing a deep green gown Grace had chosen for her hair styled elegantly for the first time in years. "You look every bit the part," Alexander said, offering his arm as the car waited outside. "I feel like I'm about to walk into a trap," she admitted. "You'll be fine. Just stay close to me and let me handle any difficult questions." The gala was overwhelming, filled with wealthy guests, glittering chandeliers, and conversations that felt like tests she hadn't studied for. Evelyn stayed close to Alexander as promised, smiling politely, answering questions about their engagement with practiced ease. To her surprise, the evening went smoothly, until a tall man with sharp features approached them near the dessert table. Alexander, the man said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. And this must be the famous fiancé everyone's talking about. Edmund Ashford, cousin to this fine gentleman here. Evelyn shook his offered hand, immediately sensing something cold beneath his polished manners. Nice to meet you. The pleasure is mine, truly. I must say, this engagement came together rather quickly, didn't it? Alexander's never been one for spontaneous decisions. Sometimes the right choice doesn't need much time, Alexander said evenly, his hand settling protectively at Evelyn's waist. Edmund's smile widened, though his eyes remained calculating. Of course, I only hope, for grandmother's sake, that this is exactly what it appears to be. He gave a slight bow and moved away, disappearing into the crowd of guests. Evelyn felt a chill settle over her despite the warm room. He doesn't believe us. No, Alexander said quietly, watching his cousin's retreating figure. He doesn't, and that could be a problem for both of us. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful conversation, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that Edmund's watchful eyes remained on them, waiting for the smallest crack in their story to appear. 3 weeks passed, and life at Ashford Manor began to feel less like a performance and more like something Evelyn hadn't expected to enjoy. Mornings were spent with tutors, learning the proper way to greet foreign dignitaries and the difference between a salad fork and a dessert fork, small details that had once seemed absurd, but now felt like pieces of a puzzle she was slowly mastering. Afternoons often found her in the garden with Margaret, who had taken to teaching her about the roses, each variety named after a different duchess from generations past. This one, Margaret said one afternoon, pointing to a deep red bloom near the fountain, was planted by my own mother, back when she first came to this house as a young bride. Frightened out of her mind, she told me, convinced she'd never fit in among all this grandeur. Did she? Evelyn asked, kneeling beside the flower bed. Eventually, she learned that a house this large means nothing without people who care for each other inside it. All the stone and gold in the world can't replace that. Margaret's eyes found Evelyn's, steady and knowing. I suspect you understand that better than most who have walked through these gates. Evelyn's chest tightened with the familiar guilt, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the roses, on the warmth of the sun, on the strange peace that had settled over her despite everything. Alexander joined them sometimes, and Evelyn noticed how differently he behaved around his grandmother when he thought no one else was watching. Softer, more like the boy Margaret must have raised, before the weight of the title hardened him. One evening, after a long day of lessons, Evelyn found Alexander in the manor's library, a room filled floor to ceiling with old leather-bound books. He sat near the fireplace, a single lamp illuminating the papers spread across his desk. "Working late again?" she asked, stepping inside. "Estate business never sleeps," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Tenant disputes, repairs to the eastern fields, contracts that need reviewing before the end of the month. It never stops." "You don't have to do all of it alone, you know." "Old habit," he admitted. "I learned early that relying on others rarely ends well." He paused, studying her for a moment longer than necessary. "You've been good with my grandmother, better than I expected. She smiles more than she has in years." "She's easy to care about," Evelyn said honestly. "I wasn't expecting that." Alexander set down his pen, leaning back in his chair. "May I ask you something? Do you regret agreeing to this, now that you've seen what it actually involves?" Evelyn considered the question carefully before answering. "No, strange as it sounds, I don't. This house, your grandmother, even you, none of it is what I expected when I signed that contract. I thought it would feel like acting. Sometimes it doesn't feel like acting at all." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than either had intended. Alexander's expression shifted, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Evelyn." Before he could finish, a soft knock interrupted them, Grace appearing in the doorway with an apologetic expression. Forgive the interruption, but there's a call from Miss Hart. She says it's urgent. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Urgent calls rarely meant good news anymore. She excused herself and took the phone in the hallway, her hand tightening around it as a familiar voice spoke on the other end. "Evelyn, it's me." Claire, Evelyn's sister's voice hadn't reached out in over a year, not since their falling out after their mother's funeral. "What's wrong?" "I need money, Evelyn, please. I saw the news, saw you're engaged to some duke now. You could ask him, couldn't you? Just enough to get me through this rough patch." Evelyn closed her eyes, old wounds reopening at the sound of her sister's desperate tone. "Claire, this isn't what you think it is. I can't just ask him for money." "Why not? You're marrying into more wealth than either of us ever dreamed of. It wouldn't even matter to him." "It's complicated, Claire. Please just trust me on this." There was a long pause on the line, followed by a bitter laugh. "Fine. Keep your secrets like always. But don't expect me to keep quiet forever, especially if reporters come asking questions about the Hart family. I'm sure they'd love to know all about our mother's debts, our father leaving us, all of it. Might make for an interesting story alongside your fairy tale engagement." The line went dead before Evelyn could respond, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, her heart pounding with a fear she hadn't felt since the bank letter first arrived. She returned to the library, forcing a calm expression despite the storm brewing inside her. "Everything all right?" Alexander asked, noticing immediately that something had changed. "Family matters," Evelyn said quietly. "Nothing important." He studied her for a long moment, clearly not believing her, but he didn't push further, respecting the boundary she had drawn. Still, the conversation with Claire lingered in Evelyn's mind for days afterward, a shadow hanging over the fragile peace she had found within these walls. The following week brought another gala, this one hosted at Ashford Manor itself in honor of Margaret's birthday. The entire house had been transformed, string lights woven through the garden trees, tables set with fine china beneath a canopy of stars. Evelyn wore a gown of deep silver, her hair swept up elegantly, and as she descended the grand staircase, she caught Alexander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "You look breathtaking," he said softly, meeting her at the bottom of the stairs. "You clean up rather well yourself," she teased, and for a moment the tension of the past week melted away, replaced by something lighter, something that felt disturbingly close to genuine affection. The party unfolded beautifully, music drifting through the garden as guests mingled beneath the stars. Margaret sat at the center of it all, radiant despite her frail health, watching her grandson and his fiancée with unmistakable joy. When the orchestra began a slow waltz, Alexander extended his hand toward Evelyn. "Care to dance, Miss Hart?" "I'm not sure I remember the steps my tutor taught me," she admitted, though she took his hand anyway. "Then follow my lead." They moved together across the dance floor, and something shifted between them as the music swelled, the careful distance they had maintained for weeks slowly dissolving with each turn. Alexander's hand rested warm against her waist, his eyes never leaving hers, and Evelyn felt her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the performance they were meant to be giving. "This feels different tonight," she whispered. "I know," he admitted, his voice low. "I've been trying to convince myself it's just the wine and the music. I'm not sure I believe that anymore." Before she could respond, the music ended, and the moment shattered as guests applauded around them. Evelyn stepped back, breathless, unsure whether the flush in her cheeks came from the dancing or something far more dangerous. Across the garden, Edmund watched the entire exchange with narrowed eyes, a phone already in his hand as he typed a message to someone unseen. His smile carried none of the warmth of the celebration around him, only cold calculation as he slipped quietly away from the party. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the garden lights had dimmed, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep, her mind replaying the dance over and over. She wandered down to the kitchen for tea and found Alexander already there, still dressed in his evening clothes, staring out the window at the darkened garden. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "No." He turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Evelyn, I need to say something, and I need you to understand it's not part of any arrangement we made." Her heart pounded as she waited for him to continue. "Tonight, dancing with you, it didn't feel like a performance. It hasn't felt like a performance for weeks now, if I'm being honest with myself. I know this complicates everything we agreed to, and I understand if you'd rather I hadn't said anything at all." Evelyn stood frozen, torn between the careful boundaries she had built to protect herself and the undeniable pull she felt toward this man who had once been nothing more than a stranger offering a business deal. "Alexander, we agreed there wouldn't be feelings involved. That was the whole point." "I know what we agreed," he said quietly. "I'm simply telling you the agreement has become harder to keep than I expected." Before Evelyn could find the words to respond, her phone buzzed against the counter, an unknown number flashing across the screen. She hesitated, then answered, her stomach twisting as an unfamiliar male voice spoke on the other end. "Miss Hart, this is Daniel Price. I write for the Camden Herald. I was hoping to get a comment regarding rumors that your engagement to the Duke of Camden is not entirely genuine. Would you care to respond before we run the story tomorrow morning?" The phone nearly slipped from Evelyn's trembling hand. She looked up at Alexander, whose face had gone pale as he read the panic in her eyes, and in that instant she understood that the fragile world they had built together was about to come crashing down around them. Evelyn ended the call without answering the reporter's question, her hands shaking as she set the phone down on the counter. "Someone told him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone told a reporter about us." Alexander's jaw tightened, a cold fury replacing the openness from moments before. "Edmund, it has to be him. He's been waiting for a crack in our story since the night we met at that gala." "What do we do?" "We stay calm," Alexander said, though his own composure seemed to be slipping. "We deny it, we present a united front, and we weather whatever comes next. Reporters chase rumors all the time. Without proof, this story dies quickly." But the story did not die quickly. By morning, the Camden Herald had published a piece questioning the authenticity of their engagement, citing an anonymous source close to the family who claimed the entire relationship had been arranged for financial gain. The article spread rapidly, picked up by other outlets eager for gossip about the aristocracy, and within hours, Evelyn's phone was flooded with messages from numbers she didn't recognize, all demanding comments, explanations, confessions. Margaret summoned them both to her sitting room that afternoon, her expression unreadable as she held a printed copy of the article in her lap. "I want the truth," she said quietly. "Both of you, right now, no more games." Evelyn's heart sank, the weight of weeks of lies pressing down on her chest. She looked at Alexander, unsure whether to confess everything or continue the performance they had built together. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, a silent question neither knew how to answer. "Grandmother," Alexander began carefully, "the engagement began under circumstances that were, admittedly, more practical than romantic." Margaret's expression remained still, though her hands tightened around the newspaper. "Go on." "I asked Evelyn to enter into an arrangement," Alexander continued, his voice steady despite the difficulty of the confession. "I was desperate to ensure you saw me settled before things became more difficult for you. I offered her financial assistance in exchange for the appearance of an engagement." The silence that followed felt endless. Evelyn braced herself for anger, for disappointment, for the collapse of everything she had come to care about in this house. Instead, Margaret simply nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "I see," she said finally. "And now, is it still merely an arrangement or has something changed?" Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Alexander glanced at her, his expression conflicted, before turning back to his grandmother. I don't know how to answer that honestly, grandmother, not without risking more than I'm prepared to lose. Margaret studied them both for a long moment, then set the newspaper aside. This conversation isn't finished, but I need time to think. Leave me, please, both of you. Outside the sitting room, Evelyn felt the walls of the manor pressing in around her, suffocating and unfamiliar despite weeks of growing comfort within them. This is a disaster, she said. Your grandmother's health, the scandal, all of it because of me. Because of Edmund, Alexander corrected firmly. Don't take on blame that isn't yours. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she had become a liability rather than a solution, a complication threatening the very thing this arrangement had been designed to protect. That evening, the situation worsened further when Claire appeared at the manor's gates, having somehow tracked down the address, demanding to speak with Evelyn directly. You could have warned me you were staying somewhere like this, Claire said bitterly as they stood in a small sitting room away from the main house. I saw the article. Is it true? Is this whole engagement fake? Claire, please keep your voice down. Why should I? You've been living in luxury while I've been struggling to pay rent, and this whole time it's been some kind of business deal. You could have told me, could have asked him to help me too. It's not that simple, Evelyn said, exhaustion creeping into her voice. This arrangement has rules, boundaries. I can't just ask for favors whenever I want. Claire's expression hardened. Fine, then maybe I'll tell the reporters myself, everything I know about our family, about how desperate you were before all this. Let's see how sympathetic the public feels toward you then. You wouldn't. Watch me. Claire turned and stormed out, leaving Evelyn alone with the crushing realization that even her own sister had become a threat to the fragile stability she had built here. Over the following days, the scandal grew louder, reporters camping outside the manor gates, demanding statements, photographing anyone who came or went. Alexander grew increasingly distant, buried in meetings with lawyers and public relations advisors, trying desperately to control a situation that seemed to spiral further out of control with each passing hour. Evelyn found herself alone more often than not, wandering the halls of a house that had begun to feel less like a refuge and more like a gilded cage. One evening, she found Alexander in his study, dark circles beneath his eyes, papers scattered across his desk in a rare display of disorder. We need to talk, she said, closing the door behind her. I know. He set down his pen, rubbing his temples. The lawyers are recommending we end the engagement immediately, issue a statement calling it a mutual decision before things escalate further. The words hit harder than Evelyn expected. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want anymore, he admitted, frustration evident in his voice. I know that every day this continues, the scandal grows worse, and my grandmother's health suffers under the stress of it. Perhaps ending things now, before anything real is lost, would be the safest choice for everyone. For everyone or for you? Evelyn asked, her own frustration surfacing. Because it sounds like you're trying to protect yourself from something you're afraid to admit. Alexander's eyes met hers, something raw and unguarded flickering behind them. I'm trying to protect you, Evelyn. If I pull away now, the story loses its fuel. You return to your life without your name forever attached to scandal and speculation. And what if I don't want to return to my old life? What if these past weeks have meant something to me too, and you're deciding to throw that away without even asking what I want? He stood, crossing the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the conflict warring behind his eyes. Because I'm afraid, he admitted quietly. Afraid that everything good happening between us is only real because of the pressure we've been under, the performance we've maintained. I'm afraid that once the pressure lifts, none of it survives. That's not your decision to make alone, Evelyn said, her voice trembling with emotion she could no longer suppress. "You don't get to decide what's real for me." Before he could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them, Grace appearing with an urgent expression. "Forgive me, but the Duchess has taken a turn. Her physician is with her now, but she's asking for both of you immediately." Fear replaced every other emotion instantly, and Evelyn followed Alexander at a run through the halls toward Margaret's chambers, the argument between them forgotten in the face of a far greater fear neither wanted to name aloud. They arrived to find Margaret propped up in bed, pale but conscious, her physician standing nearby with a grave expression. "Grandmother," Alexander said, rushing to her bedside, taking her frail hand in his. "I'm all right," Margaret said weakly, though her voice lacked its usual strength. "Merely a scare, the doctor tells me, but it has reminded me that time is shorter than I'd like to admit." Her eyes shifted to Evelyn, standing uncertainly near the doorway. "Come closer, child. I have something I need to say, and I refuse to wait any longer to say it." Evelyn approached the bed slowly, her heart still pounding from the scare, from the argument with Alexander, from the weight of everything threatening to collapse around them. Margaret reached for her hand as well, holding both her grandson and Evelyn together in a fragile, trembling grip. "I know," Margaret said softly, "far more than either of you realize. I have known since the very beginning that this engagement began as an arrangement, not a romance. I am neither foolish nor as fragile as everyone in this family seems to believe." Alexander's eyes widened with shock. "Grandmother, how?" "A woman my age learns to read people, Alexander. I saw the careful distance between you both in those early weeks, the rehearsed answers, the practiced smiles. But I also saw something else, something that grew slowly, quietly, into what I believe is becoming real, if either of you would simply stop being afraid long enough to admit it." Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes as Margaret continued, her weak voice carrying more strength than her frail body seemed capable of. "I do not have much time left, and I refuse to spend it watching two people I love deny themselves happiness out of fear and misunderstanding. Whatever this scandal has stirred up, whatever lies Edmund has spread, none of it matters if the two of you cannot find the courage to face the truth." The room fell silent, the weight of Margaret's words settling over all three of them. Evelyn looked at Alexander, seeing past his fear and hesitation for the first time to something far more vulnerable underneath, and she understood with sudden clarity that the choice before them was no longer about arrangements or contracts or protecting reputations. It was about whether they were brave enough to choose each other, scandal and uncertainty be damned. Margaret's words lingered in the room long after she had finished speaking, her physician gently insisting she needed rest, ushering Alexander and Evelyn out into the quiet hallway. Neither spoke at first, both still absorbing the weight of what had just been revealed. Evelyn leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. "She knew," Evelyn said finally. "This whole time she knew, and she never said anything." "She wanted us to find our own way to the truth," Alexander said quietly, standing close beside her. "Even now, even facing whatever illness threatens her, she's still thinking of us before herself." Evelyn turned to face him, the fear and uncertainty of the past few days giving way to something clearer, something she could no longer deny. "Alexander, when you said you were afraid none of this would survive without the pressure holding it together, I need you to know that's not true for me. What I feel for you didn't come from pressure. It came from watching you with your grandmother, from late nights in the library, from 100 small moments that had nothing to do with performing for anyone." His expression softened, the guarded distance he had maintained for so long finally cracking completely. "Evelyn, I've spent years convinced that anyone who claimed to care about me only wanted the title, the money, the name attached to it all. I built walls so high I nearly missed recognizing something real when it finally arrived. And now I think I've been a fool, wasting precious days worrying about protecting myself instead of simply choosing you." He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his own. I don't want to end this arrangement, Evelyn, not because of contracts or my grandmother's wishes. I want to stay in this because of you, because somewhere along the way, you stopped being part of an arrangement and became the person I look forward to seeing every single day. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks, relief and joy mixing together after weeks of uncertainty and fear. But even as her heart soared, a colder thought intruded, the scandal still raging outside these walls, Edmund still lurking with his calculated ambitions, Claire still threatening to sell whatever remained of Evelyn's privacy to the highest bidder. The scandal isn't going to disappear just because we've admitted the truth to each other, she said softly. Edmund started this to tear us apart. If we don't handle this carefully, it could destroy everything, your grandmother's peace, the estate, all of it. Alexander's expression turned resolute. Then we handle it together honestly instead of hiding behind carefully worded statements and lawyers. Tomorrow I'll call a press conference. We tell the truth, all of it, the arrangement and what it's become. Let Edmund do his worst. He has nothing real to threaten us with once we control the narrative ourselves. The following morning arrived with gray skies and a nervous energy hanging over Ashford Manor. Reporters gathered at the gates as promised, cameras ready, questions prepared, eager for whatever confirmation or denial awaited them. Evelyn stood beside Alexander on the front steps of the manor, her hand steady in his despite the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. "Thank you all for coming," Alexander began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "I understand there have been questions regarding the nature of my engagement to Miss Hart, questions I intend to answer honestly, without evasion." Murmurs rippled through the reporters as cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every word. "It is true," Alexander continued, "that this engagement began under circumstances that were, initially, an arrangement of convenience. I asked Miss Hart to help me ease my grandmother's concerns during a difficult time in her health, and in exchange, I offered financial assistance during a difficult time in Miss Hart's own life." The crowd stirred louder, reporters shouting questions that Alexander held up a hand to quiet. However, what began as an arrangement has become something far more genuine than either of us anticipated. I love Evelyn Hart, not because of any contract or agreement, but because of who she has proven herself to be over these past weeks, kind, honest, and stronger than anyone I have ever known. Evelyn felt tears threatening again as Alexander turned to face her directly, ignoring the cameras entirely. "I should have said this privately first, but I find I no longer care about doing things in the proper order. Evelyn, will you do me the honor of marrying me truly, without any arrangement standing between us?" The crowd erupted, cameras flashing furiously as Evelyn, overwhelmed with emotion, nodded through her tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Alexander, of course." The moment should have felt complete, but as the crowd's excitement continued, a familiar figure pushed through the gathered reporters, his expression furious. Edmund stormed forward, clearly having expected humiliation and scandal rather than this unexpected declaration of genuine love. "This is absurd," Edmund shouted, drawing the attention of every camera present. "An arrangement is still a lie, regardless of how it's dressed up now for the cameras. The Duchess deserves better than a grandson who deceived her for months." "The Duchess," came a firm voice from the doorway, "is quite capable of speaking for herself." Every head turned as Margaret appeared at the top of the steps, leaning on Grace's arm but standing with unmistakable strength despite her frailty. The crowd fell silent as she made her way slowly down toward the gathered reporters, every eye fixed upon her. "I have known about this arrangement since nearly the beginning," Margaret announced, her voice carrying clearly despite its weakness. "I encouraged it to continue, in fact, because I recognized in Miss Hart someone capable of giving my grandson the genuine happiness he has long denied himself. What began as deception has blossomed into something entirely real, and I will not stand by while my nephew attempts to destroy that happiness out of nothing more than jealousy and greed." Edmund's face reddened with fury and embarrassment as reporters turned their cameras toward him, sensing a far more compelling story unfolding before their eyes. "You're only saying this because you're dying, and you want to believe in some fairy tale before the end." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd at his cruelty, and Alexander stepped forward, his expression dangerously calm. "You will not speak to my grandmother that way, not now, not ever again. Whatever ambitions you harbored for this family's title and fortune end today, Edmund. I have documentation of your attempts to leak private information to the press, evidence my lawyers have been compiling for weeks in anticipation of exactly this kind of behavior." Edmund's confidence faltered visibly under the weight of Alexander's words and the growing attention of the assembled reporters, all of whom now scribbled furiously, sensing the true story finally unfolding before them. Without another word, Edmund turned and fled through the crowd, his schemes unraveling in full view of the public he had hoped to use against them. In the days that followed, the narrative shifted entirely. Newspapers now celebrating the unexpected love story, rather than dwelling on scandal, public sympathy turning firmly in favor of Evelyn and Alexander. Claire, seeing the changed tide of public opinion and perhaps feeling a flicker of genuine remorse, reached out again, this time with a quiet apology rather than demands, and Evelyn, though cautious, allowed a small door to remain open between them, understanding better than most the desperation that could drive people toward poor choices. Margaret's health remained fragile, but she seemed determined to witness every remaining moment of joy her family could offer her. She oversaw the wedding preparations with enthusiasm that surprised even her physicians, insisting on selecting the flowers herself, the same roses that had bloomed in that garden for generations. The wedding took place on a bright autumn afternoon, sunlight filtering through the same willow tree where Alexander and Evelyn had first spoken honestly about their fears months before. Evelyn walked down a path lined with roses, her gown simple but elegant, her heart full in a way she had never imagined possible on the day she had first read that terrible bank letter. Alexander waited for her beneath an arch of white flowers, his expression filled with a happiness that had long been absent from his guarded eyes. As she reached him, he took her hands gently, and for a moment the entire gathered crowd faded away, leaving only the two of them, finally free of arrangements, contracts, and fear. "No performances left," Alexander whispered as the ceremony began. "None," Evelyn agreed, smiling through happy tears. "Just us exactly as we are." Margaret watched from the front row, seated beside Grace, her frail hands clasped together with quiet joy as she witnessed the culmination of everything she had hoped for since the very first day Evelyn had walked through the manor's grand doors. When the ceremony concluded, and the newly married couple shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Margaret closed her eyes briefly, a peaceful smile settling over her weathered features, content in the knowledge that her family's future rested in capable, loving hands. 3 months later, Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family in the home she had cherished for a lifetime. Though grief settled heavily over Ashford Manor in the following weeks, there remained an undeniable comfort in knowing she had lived to see her grandson finally choose happiness over duty, love over obligation, and had witnessed firsthand the genuine devotion that had grown between two people who once began as nothing more than strangers bound by a simple, desperate arrangement. Evelyn often walked through the rose garden in the months that followed, tending the flowers Margaret had loved so dearly, finding peace among the same blooms that had witnessed the beginning of her unexpected journey. What had started as a fake engagement born of desperation and financial necessity had transformed into something far greater than either she or Alexander could have anticipated. A genuine partnership built on honesty, resilience, and a love that had proven strong enough to survive scandal, deception, and every obstacle placed before it. As she stood one quiet evening beneath the willow tree, Watching the sun set golden over the estate she now called home, Alexander joined her, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, resting his chin against her shoulder. Evelyn leaned back into his embrace, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the garden Margaret had loved so deeply. "Not a single one," she whispered. "Everything that mattered most was worth every risk we took to find it." And there, in the quiet peace of the garden that had witnessed both the beginning and the truest moments of their story, two people who had once agreed to nothing more than a convenient lie stood together in the undeniable light of something entirely, beautifully real.